How you doing, class? I have a new jersey on here. Check this out. This is Olympique de Marseille. I will explain why I am wearing this jersey in a future email. For now, we need to wrap up chapter 13 and we need to get chapter 14 also taken care of. So chapter 13, we did more than half of this chapter because salesperson compensation and overall evaluation of the salesperson is a very, very big deal from the sales manager's perspective, right? Let me see how far we got here. We talked about various types of compensation models. We did all this wonderful good stuff. One is the sales team versus payments, contests we did, criticism contests, expense accounts we did. We did non-financial rewards, advancement. Okay. I'm going to pick up here. All right. We've talked about multiple classes and multiple chapters that being the salesperson, having the relationships, 80-20, in charge of the most important clients and the most important revenue streams for the firm, chances are you are going to get higher opportunities for advancement, and more than anything else, you're either going to go to the top management or you're going to go to a super senior advanced position within the sales force. Plus, there are some perks besides compensation, maybe cars, office, extra training, more trips. That'd be all great. Now, don't forget, intrinsic rewards, such as recognition, is still something that should be part of the sales manager's arsenal. Intrinsic and recognition has to be part of the equation. It can't be all bonuses. It can't be all commissions. They need to be called out in front of their peers that, hey, you are the top of the top this quarter or this year or across the division or for this product line or for those kinds of things. Now, for formal recognition programs, they should be performance-based. They should be balanced across a number of different things to why someone would achieve this recognition. A public ceremony should be involved in front of their peers. It should be in good taste, i.e. not putting others down in the process. And there needs to be decent publicity. So when we talk about mixing composition, mixing levels of compensation, when it comes to salespeople should earn what they've achieved. At the same time, there are some dangers in having no ceiling and having one person potentially, because of bonuses or because of certain scenarios, making 2 or 3 times more than anyone else, or that one salesperson getting paid too much compared to the rest of the sales team. If you overpay, it causes morale issues. If you underpay, then too many of your salespeople might look outside the firm because either pay or advancement is not happening, and you'll get high turnover for very good employees. So how do you evaluate performance? Well, this is the hard part. Sometimes we look at behavior, particular tasks and how people, what they do. Sometimes we look at just performance. Sometimes we look at effectiveness. Here's the real rub. And when you guys all go get your PhD programs and you evaluate sales performance, like my buddy did his dissertation specifically on job performance, we talk about objective measures and subjective measures. See, we have slides for these. Objective measures are a number. They are specific. They are an output. They are recorded. They could be an input, but they are recorded. They could be a ratio. But an objective measure, there's no argument about, okay, how many sales calls did this person make? Well, a number was recorded. That is the specific number. How much percent of quota is this individual? That is an objective measure that's, comes right off the Excel spreadsheet. Some common objective measures Orders, accounts, or output-like objective measures. Input objective measures are calls, time utilization ratios, expense accounts, non-selling activities. These are objective input measures. Okay? So here's some more specific examples for either account development or servicing and or call activity. These are all real good. Okay. Subjective measures is significantly more challenging, and subjective measures tend to be a very large percentage of the overall evaluation process. It's a qualitative or behavioral or process. The sales manager makes a judgment, and it could be the case that there's either knowing or unknowing bias that goes into these subjective measures. Let's say, for instance, a salesperson has a really good 2 months, and then the final month of that quarter, things really did not work out for that individual. Well, there could be some psychological bias in their evaluation because the "what have you done for me lately" doesn't look all that good. The reverse could be true as well, where you have 2 really good months, the first 2 weeks of the last quarter, but the last 2 weeks of the last quarter, you missed a really, really big fish. And that one situation right at the end of the quarter overall adversely affects you more than it should. It could be the case that you and your sales manager are never on the same page. You don't see eye to eye. Guess what? Your subjective measures of performance might also be impacted. Okay? Got to be careful. Some issues with subjective: they have lack of outcome. They could be ill-defined or based on personality traits. I just described to you 2 examples of either a positive or a negative halo effect. There could be some leniency or some over-harshness. There's a central tendency to average. Sometimes there's that interpersonal bias. Sometimes there's organizational influence, i.e. someone comes from this division or someone comes from that division, and this person gets more favorably evaluated. This person gets less favorably evaluated. We try to do our best to avoid the subjective errors or biases. We try to come up with attributes and scales that are scored against. We try to avoid complete qualitative description. We try to create measures that guard against the tendency to over or under rate. We do our best to keep personal characteristics at the door. Could be that this is your buddy that you go to lunch with all the time, or maybe you have season tickets to the football game that you go to, or you went to the same university. You try not to let evaluation of one factor influence other factors, and there'd be this spillover effect. Make sure that we have this sound process, reason, system for doing your evaluations. There are some institutions that have gone to a behaviorally anchored rating scale, also known as bars. This way we can avoid some bias. It requires sales manager to consider a wide range of components of job performance. There are defined anchors that are set. And the challenge with bars is it's limited because the scales are very, very specific. And this is very complex. It takes a lot of time. And there are some sales managers that don't have the time to do this. Now, 360-degree feedback could also be an option, and we hear that this is the panacea of all performance feedback situations where we have the sales managers, you have employees evaluating each other, you have suppliers within the chain, and then of course you have the ultimate customers, i.e. there's 360 degrees around the salesperson. In theory, this is a spectacular idea. In actual practice, this is an absolute mess. To have peers evaluating each other is difficult to be getting feedback from customers, from people in the supply chain. Very, very, very difficult, especially if you need to do it in a timely manner. Some people might do 360 degree, but they might do it ad hoc. They might have either formal or informal channels, but at any given one time, this information is coming in to be integrated. But it's not like they collect all this information in order for there to be some explicit year-end performance review. Regardless of how you decide to go about as a sales manager to do this, it needs to be part of a system. It needs to be consistent. There needs to be goals set. It needs to be standardized across the sales force. So everybody gets the same kind of thing. Okay? That's chapter 13. Needed to wrap that up. Let's get to chapter 14, which is shorter, which is more specific. Now, before I go into chapter 14 at all, okay, which is the final chapter, about 80%, perhaps 90% of everything we've talked about this semester has talked about sales and selling from a North America individualistic culture perspective. The United States is the most individualistic of all the nations around the world. We are 1, the UK is 2, Canada is 3, Australia is 4. Not surprising, culturally, all 4 of those countries are more similar than not. And it drops pretty quickly after that. I mean, I was just in France in November, and they do not have a very individualistic culture when it comes to selling. They are very, very passive. We would be considered extremely aggressive when it comes to selling compared to what they do in France, compared to what they do in a lot of Europe. And even Europe is significantly more aggressive than you want to talk about collectivist societies, particularly East, particularly China, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Singapore, India. These are collectivist societies, and in collectivist societies, you cannot be as direct as we are in the United States. It's offensive. So selling is global. We need to sell all around the world. Just like we want to satisfy needs that we've talked about all semester long. Well, guess what? We still need to satisfy needs. It's how you get to those needs and how that happens is different globally than it is in the US. So you know what globalization is. You've had this in multiple of your other classes. We do see some homogeneity. We do see some commonality. We do have technology and all this stuff that helps the world come together and to be more of a footprint. You could be part of some kind of global sports organization. Okay, that helps bring cultures together. Real quick, nice little slide here. Many U.S. companies get the majority of their revenue from outside the United States. So these companies, if they want to grow, you can't keep growing in North America. You have to grow outside of North America. You have to grow outside the United States. It's not a surprise that we need growth outside the United States. In order to do that, we need to have an international sales force. As something as simple as in global, China, for instance, has a gift-giving culture. As a matter of fact, we just saw on, 11/11? It's called Singles Day, and it is like a mini Christmas. You give gifts. That's what you do. You give other people gifts. That said, and it's very common in China. It's very especially common in collectivist societies. Well, Walmart, individualistic culture, has a specific culture against gift givings because gifts, in the powers of persuasion, act like reciprocity, and therefore you owe a favor back. Well, so what if you do if you're Walmart? Because it is culturally unacceptable not to accept a gift. Walmart has even gone to having they carry around their name tags and they do the lanyard kind of thing. And part of the name tag literally says, "Hi, my name is Dan. Please don't give me a gift because I am not allowed to accept the gift." It's part of the name tag. So people see it all the time. We've already talked about culture. Culture is a system of values, beliefs, morals shared by a specific group. The culture in the United States is different than the culture in Mexico, which is different than the culture in Singapore, which is different than the culture in South Korea. And even South Korean culture is different than North Korean culture. Cultural values are expressed in beliefs, and these values are what a particular culture holds important, or they say is important, plays into what is accepted and not accepted in a particular society. Quick examples. The value of family in certain cultures, versus hard work and commitment to the job. We talked about individualistic cultures. There's also collectivist societies. Things that impact cultural values, well, language, obviously. The concept of time. And some of us know exactly what Latin time is. That's a very good example. Latin time and U.S. time are not the same time. They are absolutely not. In the United States, when we mean 9 o'clock, it's 9 o'clock. We're very literal with time. If someone says 9 o'clock, it would be an embarrassment in Latin America to show up at someone's house at 9 o'clock. As a matter of fact, it's more like 10 or 10:30. Latin time. Salesperson customer relationships. Even in the US, in a CRM world, there is this distinct salesperson customer, we're on two sides of the fence kind of thing. And in many collectivist societies, that's just not the case. If you're not like this, there's no business happening. As a matter of fact, in Japan, just because of the way the economy is set up, we have multinational corporations here in the US, but in Japan, there are interlocking keiretsus, is what they call them, where every major company has a bank and has this and has that and this. And you'll see these independent companies that are interlocked, either because of board members or because of banks or because of payments. So you look at a company like Toyota, and then you see all the electronics in the Toyota cars are JBL, or no, Panasonic. And then you realize if you went into the Toyota keiretsu, you would see that Panasonic is part of the keiretsu of Toyota. You see these relationships. And it all starts in Japan with, there's like 3 or 4 banks, and from the 3 or 4 banks, everything kind of goes in this direction. Ethics, what is accepted in one culture, what is accepted in another culture, Bribes are not legal in the US. It is unethical. Bribes in many other countries is how you do business. It is not a bribe, it is a gift. Nonverbal. All right, we've been stressing nonverbal all semester. Well, the nonverbal cues in the US in individualistic societies are different than the nonverbal cues in collectivist societies. I mean, like in Japan, when you give someone the business card, you almost have to look at it for a minute or two and admire it, because the business card is a direct representation of that individual. The last thing you want to do is go, "Oh, okay, here's my business card," and you immediately stick it in your pocket. That's disrespectful. Especially if you stick it in a back pocket close to your butt, therefore you're sitting on their face. Not good. Language, well, it's the primary communication tool. Now, we've told before that language isn't everything, but it is important. Words have different meanings in different cultures. We can go like this, and they're just victory signs. This down in Australia does not mean this. It means another finger that I'm not going to stick up that kind of looks like this. You need to do your best to catch up on these language and cultural nuances. Time, we already talked about time. We already talked about relationships. We already talked about ethics. What does it say about right here? I mean, in France and Germany, bribes are tax deductible. They're a business expense. Nonverbal. This doesn't mean this in every country. This doesn't mean this in every country. Although it's getting better because we have emojis. So here is our individualist versus collectivist society. And this is two very strong polar opposites, okay? One is not better than the other. They're just different. And if we go through this, let's go through these. So individualist culture, they're more egalitarian, they're flatter. Collectivists are more hierarchical. We care more about the information and making our own decision. Everything in a collectivist society is relationship oriented. We like sequential, get to the point. Collectivist societies are more circular. They make a point, this, that. It takes a much longer time. We argue for, argue against. Collectivist societies haggle. So American business approaches in negotiation, we're quicker, we're informal, we can make cold calls. We have authority, we have the right or the ability to make a final call. We're very direct. We tend to be more aggressive. We're not patient, and we look for the good deal. Where in collectivist societies, it's a long courting process. It could take months or years before you actually do business. It is very formal. There are lots of intermediaries. No one individual has any direct authority. It's all indirect. There's lots of questions enduring. It's all about the long term. Some business practices. We tend to have more complex logistic networks these days. Working around the world, this has around 169 parts. They're sourced from like 44 different countries, all manufactured in China, and then shipped final projects to 110 countries. Pricing can also be more complex. Here in the US or where something's manufactured, we could have foreign currency exchanges. We could have competitive pressures from the economy in one culture or the other. There could be competitive pressures not only from the economy or foreign exchange. There also could be just from competition, because you could go to another country and you're competing against the government. And the government doesn't have the same cost structure as a for-profit company. Or maybe the government company is for-profit, but since it's government-owned, they really can never go under. I think we hit this enough. Here's a good example. Here's the iPad in the United States. It's about $500. Due to currency exchange and other complications, in the UK it's $639, in France it's $652, in Germany it's $639, $637, in China it's $474, in Australia it's $564. These are the challenges. If you ever listen to an earnings call for a major corporation, they always tend to talk about foreign currency headwinds. Well, this is exactly what we're talking about, headwinds. Because we in the US, the product is manufactured, fixed and variable costs, yet you have to account for currency fluctuations and currency translation costs. So it's challenging. And we get the technology. FaceTime was the only way to do things in the past. We now have technology that helps the process along. However, in many societies around the world, especially as we get more towards a collectivist society, the technology is only part of it. In individualistic societies, you could probably get away with a lot of direct and technological selling. But in collectivist societies, it's only part of it. Helps with training. It is possible to have a global account manager where you could have a global brand like Tylenol, and there could be a Tylenol global account manager across all countries. This is someone that obviously got promoted. This is someone that obviously has gone through the whole system. They might have been in charge of a senior VP of a certain area, then they got charge of a particular country, and then after that country, you got like a region of countries, and then after that, you became the global account manager for that brand. You know, interesting stuff. I think one of the big issues, one of the last big issues that I want to talk about in this chapter is, are you hiring locals here and then sending them abroad? Are you hiring locals abroad, bringing them here for training and then sending them back? You know, are you using a national from a third country, i.e., you have 3 salespeople, one's from France, one from Italy, and one is from the UK, and the 3 of them are in charge of all of Europe. Okay? So they're going to all of Eastern Europe, they're going to all of Northern Europe. Is that going to be acceptable in those particular countries? It could be the case that it's fine in Finland, but not in Norway. In Norway, if you're not talking to a local, then guess what? You're not getting anywhere. Here's an example from Sony. You know, we have a very high percentage from Japan, East Asia, relative, like the rest of Asia, decent chunk from the US, some in Europe, and just a little bit in Latin America. Training is very difficult globally. When we talked about the expenses and the challenges when it comes to the home market, think about this in terms of global and how much more expensive it is, both the travel time and the expenses that are involved with that. Very challenging. Now, motivation in a particular country with a particular culture, such as an individualistic nation like the US, is easier to do. It's easier to have the intrinsic and extrinsic norms understood. When we talk about motivation in global countries, I'm going to tell you right now, in France, there must be incredibly strong work-life balance. You know, though they do not work more than 50 hours a week. You know, they don't. You know, literally everyone goes home. No one works on the weekends. No one works overtime. It just doesn't culturally not accept it. It doesn't work. Here's some various descriptions of culture, universal, you know. It's a way for you to think about if I was going to talk about one culture versus the other, we could talk about these dimensions, you know, like time. Time is something we all deal with, but is it synchronous or is it very specific, or is time something hierarchical versus flat? This happens across cultures. Hierarchical means very formal. You need to go through the ranks. You need to be able to develop. It takes a very long time. Flat, you could be more direct. You could probably get to the final decision maker quicker. Compensation, you know, I know salespeople in Europe that they're on 100% base salary with little to no commission. You know, that the idea of 30 or 40% of my overall salary is based on commission is something that's probably not culturally accepted there. No one will take that job. You know, there needs to be an exceptionally high percentage of, you know, because we talked about in compensation chapters earlier where, you know, every 3 months you might get a bonus check. Well, over there, it takes so much longer to get sales. You know, it could be a 6, 12, 18, 24-month process that if we're not on salary, then you're not going to find any salespeople. Again, the same challenges with evaluation of the global sales force is even that much harder for global sales forces. You know, especially if the sales manager is in one country or another country, you don't see each other very often. You have very little metrics to base your evaluation on. And that is chapter 14. Real quick, although we'll go over this on Monday, if I were to talk about ranking these chapters, I probably would have 8 and 9 as the top 2, followed by 11, followed by 13, and then I'd probably have 10, 12, and 14 after that. Okay? Thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. Olympique de Marseille.